All right, welcome back to class. Now, in this lesson, we are going to be talking about ecosystems, which is under the topic of ecology. Now, we have initially covered the fact that ecology is gotten from two words. Ecology is gotten from two words, which are oikos. I said means dwelling place. Oikos means dwelling place or a house or abode or habitat. Is that okay? That's more for oikos. Then there's logos, which means study. Is that okay? So basically, we define ecology as the study of man in relation to his environment. The study of man in relation to his environment. So under ecology, we are going to be considering ecosystem. So basically, we define ecology as the study of an ecosystem. Now, how did an ecosystem come about? Now, in the levels of organization of life, the levels of organization of life, it actually begins with the atom. Now, I was explaining the fact that atom, the word "a," which is beginning a word, whenever "a" begins a word like this, it's most probably talking about, it most probably means not. Is that okay? Not. So usually depending on the word itself, because for example, it's mostly appertained with words that the later word, the later part of the word means something else. Is that okay? For example, we have asexual here. For example, there is sexual, asexual, or asexual here means a here means not. Is that okay? Not sexual. So while sexual will mean that it is related with sex, then this one means not associated with sex. All right. So atom here, a means not. Is that okay? Then to means caught. So something that cannot be caught further. Is that okay? That is indivisible. Albeit we know now that atoms are divisible now. Atoms come together to form molecules, and molecules come together to form macromolecules, like I said. Macromolecules. Now, if you already got this part, just skip to the later parts of the video. Now, macromolecules, as they are analogous to organelles of the cells. Is that okay? Organelles of the cells are just molecules that are giant molecules. They are basically giant molecules. So the word macro here, macro means conspicuous to the eye, big or conspicuous. Is that okay? Now, so that's the meaning of organelles. So now when organelles now function together, they make up the cell. So a cell is basically we call it the functional unit of life because the functionality of the cell is dependent on those of the organelles. So you see the word organelle is getting from organ and L. L means small or minute, tiny. So they are tiny organs. Is that okay? Now when cells come together to function together, they will form tissues. And of course when tissues function together, they will form organs. So let me continue from tissue. Tissues form organs, and organs form system. Now when different systems function together, usually we have about 8 systems of the body in the body. So when these 8 systems function together, then they give rise to the organism. Is that okay? The organism. Okay, so system, I told you, simply means like a process kind of. So a process. So what we basically mean here is that an organism simply means a system of organs functioning together. Is that okay? A system of organs functioning together. Now, when they are different, when many organisms now come together of the same species, they form a population. So, for example, humans will form a population of humans, mosquitoes will form a population of mosquitoes, um, um, population of many things, ants, of cattle, of birds, bees, all of those things, wasps. So they are all for populations because they are more than one, but of the same species. So that's a population. So we define population as a group of organisms of the same species or total number of organisms of the same species in a particular geographical location. All right. So now that's population basically. Now when populations now come together, population of fish come with population of mosquitoes, of humans, of all of them come to get together. They're going to form what is known as a community. A community. So now we know that a community is made up of what? A community is made up of different populations. Different populations. Is that okay? Now, when communities now come together, different communities, both the community of living things and the community of non-living things, then they form the ecosystem. Ecosystem. So the ecosystem will comprise of both the living and non-living components of the environment. Is that okay? So ecosystem is just made up of a community of different organisms. Community of different organisms. So that's what makes up an ecosystem, and the study of this is known as ecology. Okay, now, so having gotten that, then ecosystems, function together to now form the biosphere. So okay, that's the end of that. The levels of organization of life. Now, the meaning of the word ecology was given by German biologist Haeckel. Now, Haeckel is his full name is Ernst Haeckel. Okay, so in 1869, I was the one that gave the word ecology, and of course, explained what it meant. So the word is derived from oikos, which means house habitat. Yes, I've mentioned that. Now, after that, a Danish botanist, Eugenus Warming, elaborated the idea of ecology. So he gave, he elaborated on what ecology actually means or was about. Now, for definition, we have ecology is the study of interactions among organisms or group of organisms with their environment. So interaction. Now, look at the word inter. Interaction means communication, is basically. But what that shows you is that now this word inter means, if it was just communication, we would not have used the word interaction. Interaction is a very key word here because it means inter means when something happens between two different groups, we call it inter. If something happens within a group, we call it intra. So between two different groups, interact. So it means action between groups. Is that okay? So that the action of one leads to the reaction of the other, and the action of this leads to the reaction of the other. That's of interact. So what one does causes another to do another thing. Is that okay? So that's basically what interaction means. And the interaction is among the organisms or group of organisms and their environment. So for example, in cold seasons, what do? We tend to buy sweaters, put on sweaters because we feel like, the environment is cold, so the environment acts and then we give a reaction. The action of the environment is coldness, and the reaction we give to it is putting on sweatshirts. All right, so that's that. Then the environment consists of both biotic and abiotic. Now, the biotic are the living components. The biotic, the word bios, remember, means life. So it means the living components. Is that okay? Why the abiotic will be the non-living component? Now let's see some examples of living and non-living components. So now ecology is the study of interactions between non-living components such as, what are the non-living components? We have light, water, wind, nutrients in soil, heat, solar radiation, atmosphere, etc. And so that is the interaction between these non-living components, which we call abiotic, and the biotic, which primarily include these three: the plants, the animals, and the microorganisms. Not just in soil, inside the animals themselves, in the air, all of those microorganisms together. They are the living components. So we call them biotic. Is that okay? Biotic. Now, so we got all of those abiotic components. For example, acidity or alkalinity of the soil, pH of the soil. That is an an abiotic component, because none of that is living. Base is not non-living, acid is non-living. All right. So the term ecosystem was first proposed by A.G. Tansley in 1935, and according to him, an ecosystem consists of biological community that occurs in some locale, biological communities that occurs in some locale, and the physical and chemical factors that make up its non-living environment. So you see, the community with the non-living environments make up the ecosystem. There are many examples of ecosystem. A pond, a desert. Now, a pond, for example, you find fishes or fish interacting with algae, interacting with plants, seaweeds, or seaweeds basically. So you understand that. So that is going to be a one of the examples of an ecosystem. Another ecosystem is a desert. It's the forest, an estuary, and an ocean. So all of these are different types of ecosystem. Now, if there's any word that you don't understand here, well, if there could be any, I think it would be this estuary. Now, the word estuary means, now, you know the word, now where salt and fresh water meet, the place is called estuary or brackish water. The water is brackish, we call it brackish. So, but it's called an estuary basically. An estuary is a type of ecotone. Is that okay? Anyways, the point is that is the only one I think you may not understand here. So estuary is basically where salt and freshwater mix. Okay. Now, ecosystem is the basic functional unit of ecology. The basic functional unit of ecology is what? Ecosystem. So a group of organisms interacting among themselves and with environment is known as ecosystem. Thus, an ecosystem is a community of different species interacting with one another and with their non-living environment and exchanging energy and matter. Okay? So it is exchanging energy and matter. It means an open system. Alright, so it's an open system for those of you that study chemistry. So ecosystem is an open system. That is why there is exchange of matter through through what? Through feeding. All right, so for example, last week I killed a lion here, about 2 or 3 lions, and I ate them. I ate the lions, so I derived matter from them, And inside the matter, you see energy is locked up as matter. Energy is locked up as matter inside the organism. Is that okay? So while I am practically trying to eat the flesh or the matter, while practically trying to do that, I'm actually trying to access the energy that has been locked up as matter in the body of the animal. Is that okay? Has been energy is locked up. That's why Albert Einstein said that matter and mass and energy are interconvertible. So they are the mass. Basically, my point is this: that energy here is locked up as matter. So that's why the higher the amount of matter that I consume, the higher the number of energy that I derive from it. Is that okay? Right. I brought Einstein's equation up because it makes sense in a way. So thus, an ecosystem is a community of different species interacting with one another and with their non-living environment, exchanging energy and matter, like I said. So while feeding on an organism, I'm trying to I feed on matter, and I unlock the energy that has been locked up in the matter. So ecology is the study of ecosystems. So remember that. Now animals cannot synthesize their food directly, but depend on the plants either directly or indirectly. Okay, let's look at these feeding relationships between them. Okay, so say in an ecosystem we have the living components and the non-living components. So these ones that are cycle the living, they live, and maybe this is supposed to be a rabbit. In the ecosystem, the ones that are non-living, you have the rock, the water, the soil, the air. Is that okay? But the major energy source is sunlight. That's the major energy source into every ecosystem, because it is the sunlight that these green plants everywhere here that they will use to manufacture their food. So it's after they have manufactured their food that this guy cannot eat. So rabbits cannot feed on the tree or on shrubs that are available there. Okay. Now, structure of an ecosystem. We have the biotic and the abiotic components. I've mentioned that the biotic components are the ones that are living components, abiotic the non-living components. So so the living members in an ecosystem are collectively called biotic. Okay, so we have plants, animals, and microorganisms. So we've talked about that. Let's move further. Now, classification of the biotic components. So these biotic components or these living components are also classified. Ah, excuse me. Are also classified this way. We have the producer. The producers are the ones that make food available. We call them autotrophs. Is that okay? So we're going to see that in the later part of this video. Now, then the second set, we call them, they are the consumers and the decomposers. Now, the reason why they are separated here, even though they belong to the same group called heterotrophs, they are separated because their mode of nutrition is still quite different. For example, producers will manufacture their food directly from the sun using chlorophyll for the case of green plants. Chlorophyll that is in the chloroplast. So when I said it's not chlorophyll 2, it is chlorophyll, double L, chlorophyll. So when they, you know, so we have the producers, which are the autotrophs, they manufacture their own food. Then the consumers will feed on them. Then the decomposers. Now the decomposer works only when these guys have died. This guy and this guy. The producer has died, the consumer has died. So they'll go into the ground. Once they get into the ground, then they become decomposed by decomposers. Okay. Now we have so the producers synthesize their food themselves through photosynthesis. So they synthesize their own food by themselves via photosynthesis. Alright, so we have the producers that synthesize or produce. The meaning of synthesize is to produce. So they synthesize their own food by themselves. So listen to the what I said the other time. I said they were also called what? Autotrophs. So auto, the word auto we said means self. Auto means self, and trophos or trough actually means feeding. Feeding. So when we get to trophic level, you understand now that's feeding levels. Is that okay? Now we also have so examples are all green plants, trees. Is that okay? Algae, those guys. They are what? All autotrophs because they manufacture their own food by themselves. And the process by which they do so is photosynthesis. Now basically there are two major processes of primary production in the ecosystem in especially in the water ecosystem, for example. So we have the photosynthesis, which is what we're looking at right now. We are going to see it in details in other videos, but because now we just want to talk about the ecological perspective of this. Then there's chemosynthesis. Okay, so these are the two primary processes: photosynthesis and chemosynthesis. Two primary processes of primary production in an ecosystem. So the ones that the green plants are associated with is the photosynthesis. So the photosynthesis, you see the word photo there means light. Anytime you hear of the word photo something, it means that thing has to do with light. Is that okay? So the green plants or the green pigment called chlorophyll. So they use chlorophyll that is present in the leaves of plants. It's used for converting CO2, that is inorganic, okay, and H2, which is also what? Inorganic. So in the presence of sunlight, they convert both of those, both the CO2 and H2O to carbohydrates, which is organic. Does that make sense now? Okay. Now the process is called photosynthesis, and it helps in the aerobic respiration in plants. Now the end product of or the byproduct of photosynthesis is oxygen. I've mentioned that. The end product is what? Oxygen. The byproduct, what is given off or given away during photosynthesis is what? Oxygen. So, and I mentioned the fact that in respiration in plants, it's still oxygen that is breathed out or that is breathing, but the carbon dioxide does not really leave because you look at this equation where you see it still needs that carbon dioxide. So it doesn't necessarily take out that carbon dioxide after respiration, but it uses it up. Is that okay? The plant body uses it up. So because of that, um, the process of photosynthesis is, is reliant on respiration in plants too. Okay. Now, so this is the slide showing the process of photosynthesis. You see the inorganic materials. They are, you know, combine together in the presence of in the using sun energy. This guy will manufacture carbon will manufacture glucose 6,6H12O6. It will manufacture it from this two when it uses energy from the sun, and then to give off O2. So this is the summary of the process. That's the summary. So this guy, carbon dioxide will attach to water, water. So that's just the sequence. As you go down, is the sequence. Okay. Um. Now we have group of those primary producers that photosynthesize. We have the algae. So you look at the primary color here is green. Is that okay? So in fact, that word chlorophyll, I've told you, chloro means green. So these are the guys, algae, grasses, and trees. Now, consumers. Another name for consumers are heterotrophs. Hetero means from different. So those are consumers. Basically, I said there are two Greek words from which it is coined. We have the hetero, which means different sources, and trophos, which means feeding, just like we have seen before. So consumers are now further classified into, we have the primary consumers. So the primary consumers are fed on by you know the primary consumers or herbivores or plant eaters. So the first group of consumers, we call them the primary consumers. The primary consumers. Okay. So we have the primary consumers. Now you see these primary consumers, the primary consumers. So we have the secondary, the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary. So the primary consumers are the one that eat the grasses directly. So examples, we call them herbivores. So they directly depend on the plant for their food. So they are called plant eaters. And examples are insect, rat. See, insects is very major thing here. Insects. So All right, so I have the so these are the primary consumers or herbivores. So because we said they feed on the the producers directly. And here are the secondary consumers. So who are the primary carnivore? Is that okay? Call them primary carnivore because they are the first set of flesh eaters or meat eaters. So what do you mean by first set? It means that they are the ones that feed on the they feed on the primary consumers, which are already animals. The primary consumers are animals. So if you are feeding on an animal, then you are a carnivore. And then this being the first set of animals, so they feed on those first set of animals, which are the primary consumers. So it means that they directly depend on herbivore. So that's why we call them carnivores, primary carnivores, but they are secondary consumers. Now, okay, so I said the secondary consumers, they are meat eaters. They are the primary carnivore or meat eaters. The tertiary consumers are also meat eaters, but in this case, they are the secondary carnivores because they are the second set of carnivores. These are called primary carnivores because they are the first set of meat eaters, the ones that feed on the primary consumers. So, and you know, primary consumers are herbivores. So, secondary consumers are the ones that feed on the first animals. So, we call them primary carnivores. And they include frog, cats, snakes, small birds. And then tertiary consumers, we have them to be called secondary carnivores, and they are because they are second set of meat eaters. Then the tertiary consumers are secondary carnivores. The secondary The tertiary consumers are secondary carnivores. They feed on secondary consumers. So they feed on all of these guys. Examples include hawk, eagle, lion, tiger, etc. So even humans fall in this category. Uh, Albeit we can feed on some here too, but most of the time we are most likely to feed on the ones here. So hence we are tertiary consumers. Okay. Now, but the thing is that sometimes with humans, we can also our feeding can overlap, kind of like we can go on to feeding on even the producers themselves. So because we feed on both flesh and herbs, we'll be called omnivores. Omnivores. So omni here means multifunctional or multifaceted, or like omni means like doing many things, like combining more than one type, you know, several, you know. Mhm. So, so omnivores, the verse talks about the feeding. Okay. Now, this whole association now gives rise to what is called the food chain. So, a simple food chain will have the producer, which is the leaf you are seeing here, that is producing food or glucose. This will be fed upon by this is a caterpillar. So you see, this one is an oak tree leaf. Okay, so this guy will be fed upon by a caterpillar. The leaf of the oak tree will be eaten by a caterpillar. Then birds will feed on the caterpillar. Is that okay? Such as the tree creeper. That's a small bird. It's going to feed on this tree creeper, and then the tree creeper is going to be fed upon by the hawk. Tree creeper will be eaten by the hawk. So that is a simple food chain, and it's called a food chain because it is showing the order or the sequence um, of feeding. Now, nature is designed such that these guys here are going to be more than this guy. These guys, the tree leaves, are going to be more than these guys, which are the producers, to be more than the primary consumer. Then the primary consumer will be more rather, than the secondary consumer. So there will be more caterpillars to eat than the tree creeper. The number of tree creepers will be less than the number of caterpillars. Then the number of tree creepers will be higher than the number of hawks. Because usually the reason is this guy, caterpillar, will want to eat more than one tree, more than one oak leaf. Then the tree creeper want to eat more than one caterpillar, while this one, the same way, wants to eat more than one tree creeper. So because of that, the eating is usually more than the eater. So in a prey-predator relationship, the prey are usually more rather, are usually more than the predator. Usually more than the predator. So here is the prey. I think around here is the prey-predator relationship. This and this. This one predate on this, but basically we just talk about it as food chain here because we're basically considering feeding, not the other degrees of association with them in terms of how they control their population and all. So that's that for this simple food chain. Now, we have omnivores here now. Omnivores are organisms that feed both on plants and animals. So they create an overlap around amidst those that simple food chain. In fact, it is the presence of omnivores that that brings about what we call an intricate relationship in the chain so that it becomes a web. So the presence of omnivores literally makes the simple food chain more complex. So because of that, it becomes a web. I'm going to show you what that means. Now, we have the dentrivore. Now, the detrivore, so I said dentrivore. Detritivores. Detritivores they feed on detritus. Now, you see, detritus means dirt, more like. Detritus means like waste. Is that okay? So they feed on waste. So they are the ones that feed on dead organisms, wastes of living beings, and partially decomposed matter. So they feed on wastes generally. They feed on wastes and things that are decomposing. Is that okay? So they also cause an overlap in the you know in the food chain. Is that okay? Because they feed at all levels. They can feed on decaying plants and also they feed on decaying animals. Do you understand? So that's that for the detritivore. Now, the third group that we'll be considering after the consumers are the decomposers. Now, these ones consume dead plants and animals and decompose them. So what decomposition here means that it means is that they reduce them to very simple forms. Is that okay? They reduce them to simple forms. For example, when a wood when wood dies and decays, human die and decay, plants die and decay, they become mineralized and they turn to part of the soil. So that action, that whole process, that whole sequence that turns those things into part of the soil is decomposition. So those guys that carry out the process will be called decomposers. Now decomposers attack the dead bodies of producers and consumers and decompose them into simpler compounds. So during decomposition, inorganic nutrients are released. So they derive their inorganic nutrients. They release inorganic nutrients rather through their various actions that leads to the disintegration of those things. So you can see here, we have bacteria, we have fungi that help in the decomposition of matter. Is that okay? So the inorganic nutrients together with other organic substances are then utilized by the producers for the synthesis of their own food. Okay, so for example, the plant, when the ground has been nourished with the decomposed matter, then the plant will now be nourished, and because of that is able to produce more food. So they have been utilized. I mean, those products of of decomposition have been utilized by producers to produce food, and that cycle will repeat itself again. So the producer will now be fed upon again by the primary consumer, and again secondary consumer, then to tertiary consumer, who will then die again, will be decomposed, and their product again will go back to nourishing the plant, and the sequence will repeat itself. I hope that is clear. Now let's talk about the abiotic components. Now we have the non-living components, which include, they form the abiotic components, and they include climate, the soil, the water, the air, and energy. etc. We've considered other examples. Then we talked about pH, talked about temperature. All those guys are the abiotic component because they are non-living. They are non-living, but in one way or the other, they affect the ecological. They affect the ecological system or ecosystem. Now we have the physical components of those guys, and we have the chemical components. So when I talk about pH, for example, those are basically the chemical components. Then the physical components are the ones that include energy, climate, nutrients, and living space that the biological community needs. They are the energy, climate, nutrients, and living space that the biological um, community needs. So think of it as any component that is not living yet is physical. For example, physical means like it is measurable, kind of. Is that okay? Like the temperature, okay, that's physical. The amount of nutrient that the soil needs, that is physical also. The quantity of space that an organism needs, is that okay? Is that okay? Whether it derives it from competition or not, as far as the amount of space that it needs, it is also going to be physical because it is measurable. Is that okay? So that is that, and almost like it is visible to the eyes, but it's not all that will be visible to the eyes. For example, living space, for example, is visible to the eyes. All right. So those are physical components of the abiotic component. Then we have the chemical component, and they are the sources of essential nutrients. For example, so those are the sources of the nutrients. So, like, we have the protein, lipids, carbohydrates, and all the micro and macronutrients. You see, all these guys are the chemical components. Anyone that has to do with chemical elements, just remember them as what? Chemical components. All right. So, so here you're gonna see sunlight. You're gonna see rain. You're gonna see the heat and all that. So those are the abiotic components. Now let's talk about the types of ecosystem. We have the natural ecosystems, and these operate themselves under natural conditions based on habitat types. It can further be classified into terrestrial, aquatic, and artificial. No, the natural can be classified into the terrestrial and the aquatic. However, there's a third one I didn't add here, and that is the arboreal. The arboreal, and that is like the ecosystem that you know ecosystem of tree dwellers. Tree, for example, the terrestrial are the ones that are related to land, people, the animals or the organisms that dwell on land. Then these ones, so we have the grassland, the forest ecosystem, the desert. Okay, basically, there are two. There are two for the ecosystem. But for habitation, there are about three. We have the terrestrial, the aquatic, and the arboreal. So the aquatic ecosystem has to do with um, fresh water and marine water. Now, for the fresh water, we have the um, okay. In this one, there is also the estuary where both of them meet. For the fresh water, we have the running water ecosystem. We call it the running water. We call it the lotic ecosystem or lotic. And I think that will be lotic ecosystem. Then the standing water ecosystem, which are the ponds, the lakes. We call them the lentic. Is that okay? We have the running water, which include the rivers and streams. We call them the lotic ecosystem. And we have the standing water, which are the lentic, which form the lentic ecosystem. Then we now have the marine. The marines are the ones that consist of the seas, the seashore, generally the ocean. Is that okay? Those are the marine ecosystem. Then in between both, I told you we have the estuary. Estuary is basically the point where the fresh water, fresh plus marine, freshwater plus marine, where they meet. Is that okay? All right. Now we now have the man-made or artificial ecosystem. The artificial ecosystem is operated or maintained by man himself, such as cropland and gardens. So we are the one that operate this by ourselves. Is that okay? We determine all the conditions that happen here. Okay, so for example, now I mentioned only croplands and gardens, which are what we tend to. So at the end of the day, to even in a pond of water that we raise fish by ourselves, that is going to be a man-made because we simulate the entire condition. It's especially talking about the intensive system of culture where everything depends on the man. The man controls the water temperature, the man controls the level of water, the acidity, the alkalinity of the water, and all of those things, the level of nutrient available. That is going to be a man-made or artificial ecosystem for that fish. Do you understand now? So that is what we just mean by artificial ecosystem. If it entirely depends on the manipulations or the influence of the man himself, So that will be man-made primarily. Okay, so now we now have the functions of an ecosystem. Now we have the function of an ecosystem is to allow the flow of energy. So that's the major function of an ecosystem. It allows the flow of energy and cycling of nutrients. Cycling of nutrients, that is, nutrients first flow of energy through feeding. You know that I said that feeding is a way of unlocking energy that has been locked up as matter in the body um, of the organism. So then nutrient cycling simply means making the nutrient that is present in, for example, nutrients present in the producer will be will be given to the primary consumer, and the one present in primary consumer will be given to the second consumer once it feeds on it on this guy. Then the one present in this one will be given to tertiary consumer. I hope you are getting the sequence. This is also always the sequence in the food chain. All right. So now functions of this ecosystem are of three types. You have the primary function, which is to manufacture starch through photosynthesis. Then there is the secondary function, which is to distribute energy in the form of food to all the consumers. Then the tertiary function is now all living systems died at a particular stage. They die rather at a particular stage. So these dead systems are decomposed to initiate third function. So and that third function is the cycling. So what happens is this: when the organism dies, the nutrient does not die. Is that okay? So it is by way of decomposition that these nutrients get returned to the ecosystem. And that was what I said during through the use of the nutrients from the soil by plants. So plants use the nutrients from the soil. How did the nutrient get into the soil? Through the decomposition process or mineralization of the dead organisms. Is that okay? They will turn into nutrients for the plants, and the plant is going to use them, thereby bringing back the nutrients that was locked in the soil when the organism died, bringing it back into the cycle. All right. So that is that for the functions of an ecosystem. Now, it may be understand using studying the following terms. We have the energy and material flow, food chain, the food web, and the food pyramids. So let's quickly go over this. Let's quickly go over this. Now we have the energy flow in the ecosystem. Energy is the most essential requirement for all living organisms. So solar energy is the only source to our planet Earth. So the solar energy is the only source of our planet Earth, the one in which that is the one in which plants can harness. That is the solar. Okay, so it doesn't mean that solar energy is the only type of energy that exists on Earth, but the one that is available for the plants to use. So then we have the solar energy is the only natural one. Solar energy is transformed to chemical energy in photosynthesis by plants. Is that okay? So that solar energy will be locked up as chemical energy in them. Then some amount of chemical energy is used by the plants for their own growth and metabolism. So they use some of this chemical energy that they have, gathered, produced from the sun. They're going to, or trapped from the sun rather. They're going to use that for their own growth and metabolism. And remaining is transferred to the consumer by the process of eating. So when the animal feeds on the primary consumer, then the primary producer rather, they are able to harness the energy that is stored up in them, albeit some of them will be transformed into some of them will be used for growth, as I said, by that organism. So it's not all the energy that it got from the sun that gets transferred. Don't worry, when we get to food chain and pyramid of energy, you're going to see what I mean. Thus, the energy enters the ecosystems through photosynthesis and passes through different trophic level actually, trophic level or feeding levels. Okay. Now, so we have this sequence: sun to producers, and some will be released as heat. So don't forget that. So the transfer of energy from here to here is not 100% efficient. In fact, we are going to see soon that it is only 10% efficient. So it means what that means is that if the total amount of energy that is gotten from the sun is about, let's say, 300 joules. I mean, that's the unit of energy, right? So if from here to here, 300 joules was, derived. By the time you get, now let's use something that is quite useful, that's quite big in number. Let's say the total amount of energy that was stored up from here was 3 kilojoules, 3,000 joules. That's what I mean. Now, the amount of energy that we'll get from here, um, based on the amount that will be used up by the producers to grow and the amount that will be released, given off as heat, the amount that will be gotten there will be just about 300 joules. That is just 10% of what was gotten in the initial point. Then from the consumers to these decomposer, it might not be more than 30 joules, which is another 10% of what was gotten here. Because some of these 300, out of these 300 joules, the consumers will also use some to do what? Grow, for growth, and emit some as heat. Is that okay? So because of that, they we also have to give only 30 joules to these guys. And then the inorganic nutrients that these guys will give will only be about 3 joules in energy, and they would release some as heat, and of course use some to also survive and grow. Is that okay? Or there are the various metabolic processes, and by the time it's getting back to the producers as nutrient, it's only about less than 3 joules that they will get back. Is that okay? Then before this cycle now reoccurs. So this is what we call a cycle. Is that okay? This is what we call a cycle. All right, I hope this is clear. Their efficiency is just about 10%. You see in some textbooks or in some sources that they will say 10 to 15%. All right, so, well, it's basically 10%. Okay. Now, the flow of energy in an ecosystem follows the law of thermodynamics. Now, the law of thermodynamics says that energy can never be created. The first law says that energy can neither be created nor destroyed, but it can be converted from one form to another. So, what you're seeing there is that energy is being converted from solar to chemical. Then from solar it went to chemical in the form of maybe glucose for the plant. Then from chemical, it went to chemical again in the animal, to chemical again. But this time, some are used for insulation. So because of that, heat is also evolved, and that means that some chemical has been converted into heat. Is that okay? Then others was because of the insulation of the other animals today will radiate heat, um, emit some as heat, and of course, use some which will still be stored as chemical again. Do you understand now? All right. So energy for an ecosystem comes from the sun. It is absorbed by plants and it's converted into chemical energy. This chemical energy is utilized by consumers, transformed into heat. And then the second thermodynamics law says that whenever energy is transferred, there is loss of energy through the release of heat. This second law is just saying that the process is never 100% efficient, the process of transfer. So energy is transferred between trophic levels in the form of heat as it moves from one trophic level to another. So the loss of energy takes place through respiration, work, running, hunting, and all those other activities that animal engage in. So that is what leads to the loss of energy as heat. Is that okay? The various physical processes that we engage in, they use up some of this energy. So and the energy will be lost as heat. I hope the process is clear. First law and second law of thermodynamics. Okay, so we can easily see that in this cycle. You'll see the sun, you know, the sun. The process by which the sun heats up the earth is called insolation. Is that okay? Just so you know. Now, my point is this, that the plant is going to harness solar energy from the sun, manufacture food, release some as heat, and of course, transfer the rest as chemical to the animal. The animal, because of his own activities, to release some as heat or transfer the remaining as chemicals to bacteria after it has died, basically. Because when we get to bacteria, we know we've gotten into the decomposers. So some, of course, will be emitted as heat also during the process of the transfer. Then bacteria also will emit some as heat, and then we'll now return this energy back to the plant through, mineralization and of course fertilization of the soil. Is that okay? So as they fertilize the soil, the plant is regaining the nutrient again, and then the process or the cycle continues over and again. All right. So now this box you're seeing here, the box is here, shows the amount of energy that is stored. You see that? The amount of energy that is stored. Then the arrow shows the energy that is flowing. Is that okay? All right. Now let's talk about food chain. Now, food chain is basically um, the transfer of food energy from one plant through a series of organisms. Transfer of energy from one plant through a series of organisms. We actually define it as a simple linear relationship. Um, a simple linear feeding relationship. Feeding relationship between organisms from producer to consumer. That's another definition. A simple linear feeding relationship, and it's linear because you're going to see it's a straight line. So a food chain always starts with plants and ends with animals. And when the organisms die, they are all decomposed by microorganisms. We are just repeating the same thing we said before. And we said at each and every level, nearly 80 to 90% of the potential energy gets lost as heat. So I told you, so you're going to see roughly 10%, roughly about 10% is getting transferred to the next level. Do you understand? Because 80 to 90% will be lost as heat. So here, you're going to see the grass, being eaten by the grasshopper. Then the grasshopper will be fed upon by the mouse, and then the owl will eat the mouse. So that's simple food chain. Okay. Ah. Then we have what is called the trophic levels. Trophic level is usually arranged like a pyramid, but it's different from the pyramid though. It's different from the pyramid. Now, so we said the trophic level simply goes there. We have about 5 trophic level. Is that okay? Now, it's just showing the trophic level just shows how energy is transferred in the ecosystem. Is that okay? That's what trophic level refers to. And I told you that trophic refers to feeding. Is that okay? So the green plants or producers, they are the first trophic level, and the herbivores or primary consumers are the second, and then carnivores that feed on those guys or secondary consumers are the trophic level 3, and the tertiary consumers fourth level, and the decomposers the fifth level. So if we were to draw them in a pyramidal shape, we're gonna have a pyramid of energy that looks like this. So at this level, you have what first trophic level, which are producers, like we said. Producers are here. Then the second um, herbivores, the guys that eat on feed on these guys, or primary consumers. Then the guys that feed on primary consumers are the secondary consumers or carnivores. Then the guys that now feed on these guys, they are the tertiary consumers or carnivores still, or secondary carnivores in this case, or secondary consumer rather in this case. Then the guys here will be the decomposers that return the energy back to these people. All right. So that is the trophic levels. Okay. Then we have this food chain. I just wanted you to see as many examples as possible. So you're going to see from the sun, the grass takes up solar energy, then the grasshopper takes it from the grass by consuming the grass, then a snake eats the grasshopper, and then the eagle eats the snake. So when both of them or any of them die, in this case we are referring to only the eagle dying, but of course we know all these organisms will die. So um, they will now give the energy to the bacteria, and the bacteria will return the nutrients to the grass. Is that okay? And then the process will now repeat itself. Okay. But it's pretty much the same thing we've been saying. Now, the food web. Now, the interlocking pattern of various food chain in an ecosystem is called food web. Now, interlocking means that they are, they are. Let me show you a simple food chain. You're going to see this. But basically, just learn the um the definition. Is a complex feeding relationship. Is that okay? That forms an interlocking pattern. Is that okay? So in an ecosystem, and that is what we call food chain, the food web rather. So you're going to see this now. That here, you see that green plants will be eaten by goats, green plants will be eaten by rabbits, green plants will be eaten by mouse. Because so in the real world, what we have is a food web, not a food chain. Is that okay? So by this goat will be eaten by a jackal will be eaten by a lion, and the lion, of course, will be eaten by me because I kill lion every day. You understand now? That is me. You understand? Nothing will eat me. Is that okay? So we have the rabbit will be eaten by the wild cat. The wild cat, the lion. Of course, I repeat, I can also eat the wild cat. For example, I killed one the other day. I can also eat the jackal. You see? So the mouse will be eaten by the owl will be eaten by the snake, and the snake by the kite. So and the kite will be eaten by me again. You understand? So you're going to see, I can also come here to come and eat mango. You understand what I'm saying? So you see, I am, causing an overlapping pattern such that we are just eating on different things as we like. So we are eating different things rather as we like. So because of that um, interlocking pattern or overlapping patterns, we have a food web, not necessarily a chain. So if we were to draw a chain here, this would be a chain, the one that goes from here to me. Is that okay? This rabbit, wild cat, lion, and me. That'll be a food chain. If we wanted to draw another one, this would be a food chain. And that will be a food chain. So several food chain that are connected. We'll call that a food web. Is that okay? All right. So this is another food web you've seen here. So you can draw anyone as you deem fit. Is that okay? This is another food web. So you're going to see these levels here contain what? All of these levels here contain the producers. Um, sorry, the producers. And all of these levels contain the first consumers, the guys that first feed on the producer. Algae and water will be fed upon by the prawn or the carp. The carp is a grass eating fish. Then the water weed also can be eaten by the fly or the what is this here? The slug. Okay, the slug is a mollusk. So, you know, like that. Then the carp will be eaten by the trout or be eaten by the kingfisher and like that in the water. So of course we will now eat all of these guys too. Is either we can either fish these guys or fish these guys. Okay, we don't fish this guy. But we can fish turtle and fish trout and eat. Then of course we can kill the kingfisher. Oh, I don't know if you eat frog, but I don't eat frog. Then we eat snake also. So we can feed on this too. Is that okay? Or lions feed on them. Then me will now kill lion again like I normally do. I hope you're getting my point. All right. Now, what's the difference between a food chain and food web? So, in a linear food chain, if one species gets affected or becomes extinct, then the species in the subsequent trophic level are also affected. What that is just saying is that when one level gets affected, for example, if the producers did not produce, then the guys, the primary consumers that are supposed to eat them, will be affected. Of course, if these ones are affected, then this one will be affected. Is that okay? These ones will be affected, the secondary consumers. Then, if the secondary consumers are affected, of course, the tertiary consumers who feed upon them will be affected. And that's why the simple food chain doesn't work. It is a food web that works. Is that okay? So we call it a cascading pattern. Cascading means it is coming from the top like that. Once the primary consumer is affected, I mean the producer that is affected, primary consumer is affected, secondary consumer is affected like that. That is going to trickle down. The effect is going to trickle down like that. We call it this cascading effect. Is that okay now? But in a food web, if one species gets affected, it does not affect other trophic levels so seriously. Is that okay? So because there are a number of options available at each trophic level. Is that okay? So that's the way it is. That's the way it is. That's the way it is. The levels do not affect each other that much because there are many options available, especially for omnivores. Is that okay? All right. So so a pond food chain here, you're gonna see, you know, there's a pond food chain. Um, Basically, I think this is a fertilizer. You apply fertilizer to the pond. The fertilizer, you know, the fertilizer is going to cause, is going to bring about primary production, increase in primary production. When I mean primary production, I mean primary producers will produce a lot. Is that okay? Or we call it fertility into the water. So because of that, the fertilized water results in higher productivity. Then fishes like carps, which are grass eaters, feed on those algae and other weeds that grow in the this thing. Then an animal like salmon or trout will feed on that carp, and then me, the fisherman, I will now kill the trout and then I'll use it for pepper soup. Somebody say, I get you. I get you. All right. Okay, so now what's the significance of the food chain? Okay, thank God, we're already finishing it. Now, significance of the food chain and food web. The food chain and food webs play very important role in the ecosystem, and energy flow and nutrients takes place through them. So, energy flow can only and nutrient cycling can only be achieved through this food chain and food web. They maintain and regulate the population size of different trophic levels and thus help in maintaining ecological balance. I hope that makes sense to us. What that is just saying is that the relative availability of one level of species in one level will affect the availability of species in the other level. Do you understand? For example, where there is ambient grass, I said ambient, a large amount of plants that can eat. You are going to see herbivores are going to thrive a lot. Herbivores, the population of herbivores will increase. Why? Because there is, there is there is in terms of feeding now, the environment is very supportive. It's like okay, there are many things to eat. You understand? There are much grasses to eat, so herbivores will flourish. Is that okay? Herbivores will flourish. And because herbivores are flourishing, those that feed on herbivores, their carrying capacity will also increase. And what that means is they too, they will have much of these guys to to feed upon. So because if these guys are not available to feed on these guys, the population of these guys will not be checked. So these guys help to check their population. That is the primary consumers will help to check their population. And of course the secondary consumers help to check the population of this guy. And the tertiary consumers help to check the population of these guys. Do you understand the way the sequence is going now? So because of that, they control the population size. And these ones have the property of biomagnification. Okay, now the food web and food chain, it has the property of biomagnification. What that means is this: if, for example, in a plant, there is a particular kind of nutrient or a particular kind of, let's say, pollutant that has been, taken up by that plant, that pollutant will be passed to whatever feeds on it. Whatever feed on this guy, and then the pollutants will stay on this guy. If that pollutant kills this guy and or does not kill this guy, that thing too will come to this guy, to this secondary consumer. And remember, the second consumer will not eat one of these, to eat plenty. And let's say it was plenty of those guys that ate this guy. So because of that, this that pollutant, let's call it M. That pollutant M would have magnified in this guy because this guy will eat three of these guys. Tertiary consumer will now eat like two of these guys. And two of these guys, let me use maths for you so that you can understand. Let's say there's a pollutant X. Is that okay? This pollutant X gets transferred because on the body of the plant, it got transferred. Maybe it killed, maybe, if the plant was already, suffering from a disease or whatever, and that guy still ate it, the consumer, let's say the grasshopper eats it. Now this grasshopper is going to have X. But because it is not one grasshopper might not eat one grass. It might eat plenty grasses. Let's say it eats two grasses, so it's going to get 2x. Another grasshopper will eat, still get that it is primary consumer, we eat two grasses, so it will get 2x from that same, provided it's eating in the same, because it's in one ecosystem. Is that okay? So it's from the same source. Another grasshopper will eat this guy will also get 2x. Okay. Now, the primary consumer will now eat three of these guys because he's hungry. Is that okay? Or eat grasshoppers, let's say lizards. So lizards will now eat these three guys. Lizard will now get 2x plus 2x plus 2x. Lizard will now get 6x. Then who will not eat lizard? Snake, for example. So a snake will not eat one lizard. Let's say there are two lizards. Each of those lizards got 6x because two of them will eat three grasses too that have gotten three grasshoppers too. So 2x. Then that snake will get 12x. So what do you see? Magnification. We started at x and then we have magnified to 12x. So the process is called biomagnification. Is that okay? So, for example, we said the non-degradable materials keep passing from one trophic level to another. At each successive level, the concentration keeps increasing. That's what we're saying. And this process is known as what? biomagnification. First, when the concentration increase, we call it bioconcentration, but leave that term. I think the one you will probably be asked is about this biomagnification. So, bioconcentration simply means the concentration in a particular species is increasing. Is that okay? So, and that is it for biomagnification or for the significance. So, so now what happens in a food web now? What happens when one animal population in a food web increase or decrease? The impact of that population change ripples through the trophic level. So and eventually affecting all species in this food web. So you can see it says you should trace the ripple effect from a change in one species and see. Do you understand now? All right, so thank you very much for staying till the end. God bless you. You can go on to taking your test now.